Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar produced and presented by the Cultural Diversity and Social Justice ASPA of the Society for Music Teacher Education. I'm Dr. Amanda C. Soto from Texas State University. This webinar marks the second in a special series of sessions coordinated by the co-chairs of the Cultural Diversity and Social Justice SMTE ASPA. They are myself and Dr. Karen Salvador from Michigan State University, Flint. Information regarding these webinars is available at our website, smte.us, and on our Facebook group page titled Cultural Diversity and Social Justice, SMTE ASPA. Please make sure to subscribe to our listserv and like our Facebook group page. The links are in the chat box below. Today's webinar focuses on the topic Change the Story, Think Differently and Act Courageously. In this webinar, Dr. Spradley will share her story of how a large metropolitan public school district took progressive acts to provide access to music education for a greater student population, particularly those marginalized. She will share strategies that proved to be successful in implementing change to engage all stakeholders in the process and how policies and practices were addressed to support a more socially just teaching and learning system. The attendees will be asked to participate in the dialogue of other potential strategies that could provide quality music education to all students in public schools. Our presenter is Dr. Mackie B. Spradley, and she is a coordinator of the Secondary Choral and General Music Studies for the Dallas Independent School District. She received the Bachelor of Music in Voice from the University of North Texas and a Master's of Arts in Vocal Pedagogy from Texas Women's University. She received her Doctorate of Philosophy from the University of North Texas in College of Education with a major in Curriculum and Instruction and a minor in Anthropology. In a few moments, we'll hear from Dr. Spradley. First, some quick instructions for those of you who are online. To view this webinar with the slides in full screen, simply click on the full screen icon shown in the upper right corner of your share pod. To return to the current view, press your computer's escape key or place your cursor near the top of the screen and select Return from the drop-down menu which appears. Please do not connect your microphone or camera until the Q&A portion of this webinar. If you have already connected your microphone, please mute it, which will cause a line to appear over your microphone indicating it is now muted. We will not use the camera option in today's webinar. Those of you online today will have opportunities to interact with our presenter. You may use the chat box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to submit questions or comments at any time. You can also indicate your wish to be recognized by clicking on the small raise hand icon located on the computer screen when in normal mode. When recognized, turn or unmute your microphone and please click again on your hand icon to turn it off. When you're finished, please mute your microphone. And finally, speakers are asked to talk slowly and distinctively so your input is easily understood. This session is scheduled to last between 30 to 45 minutes. And now I would like to present Dr. Mackie Spradley.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited about this webinar, and I'm hoping that we can engage in a conversation about how to think differently and act courageously and change the story in our prospective school districts and teaching and learning systems. This is actually what happened in our district in Dallas ISD. I've been in Dallas ISD for 12, 13 years. And we started off as a struggling school district, particularly in music education and in fine arts. And we wanted to be able to do something different. To start this off, I'd just like to talk about some of the context in which we work. It is 60 years ago, we were celebrating the ruling of Brown versus the Board of Education. And that is the legislation that actually said that education is perhaps the most important function of the state and local governments. And the power of education to transform an individual as well as a society as a whole can never be underestimated. Those are heavy words, and although it seems that that law was supposed to pass the opportunity for every child in the United States to have a right to an education, the realization of that education is much more complex and difficult to achieve. In the state of Texas, we have, as a part of our um, state constitution that there is a general diffusion of knowledge is essential to the preservation of the liberties and the rights of the people. We have it written in our Constitution, but how do we make that a realization for the many students that are in Texas and in public schools? And then, more importantly, how does a local school district embody that language? And how does a music department or a fine arts department make that a realization for the students that they are responsible for? To learn more about what's going on in Texas, as you can see in 1988, in the enrollment of schools, of students in public ed in Texas was about 3 million. At this present time, we have 5.1 million public ed school students in the state of Texas. In 1988, we did not gather any data about whether or not they were economically disadvantaged. That only came later, after we were trying to be more accountable for the achievement gap and whether or not we were actually serving students the way that we were supposed to. And then, as you can see, we started to take more disaggregated data about the race and language and so forth. In Texas now, we have over 1,228 school districts, but as a larger part of those school districts, 84% have less than 5,000 students. That means the majority of the school age kids are actually going to rural schools. And if you look at the school population in the state, 12.7% are African American, 51.3% are Hispanic, and 30% are white, 3.6% are Asian, 1.8% or two or more races, and 0.5% are considered other, that label other. But more importantly, over 60% are considered economically disadvantaged. The label poverty would suit this very well. And as you begin to unpack this even more, that means that just under 2 million are in the 18 largest school districts. So let's look at what those districts are in the state of Texas. And I think that this is so well connected with our focus on cultural diversity and how we talk about it, because I think it's going to push us, or it should reveal that there is a need for us to change the conversation a little bit. What we have talked about and what we have used as labels and research and how we frame our research, there's a need to look at things a little bit differently. The largest school districts in Texas, number one, Houston, Dallas, Cy-Fair, which is outside of Houston, Northside, which is outside of San Antonio, Austin, Fort Worth, which is within the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, Fort Bend, which is outside of Houston as well, Northeast, which is San Antonio area, Arlington, back again in Dallas-Fort Worth area, and Aldine, which is also in the Houston area. These are the largest school districts. So when we start talking about cultural diversity, a lot of times we use urban and we tie that word poverty and cultural diversity into that urban language. But when you actually look at the statistics of which districts are more diverse, that does not fit it at all, because the districts that are more diverse are HEB, Hearst Euless Bedford, which is a part of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, Fort Bend ISD, which is on one of the largest school districts, Cy-Fair, which is also one of the largest school districts. But as you can see in the most diverse school districts, that list looks drastically different from the largest school districts. So really, what does this mean? It means that as of last year, Houston ISD could claim to be one of the most segregated school district in the state. Dallas ISD took the second place. What does that actually mean? What does that mean? What is happening in that school district? How does that change our our research? How does that change how we talk about cultural diversity? Because the schools are no longer the ones, when we talk about urban, that is no longer what we, is that what we mean when we say cultural diversity? And that Texas is not alone in this issue. That there are 6 other states that are also reported as being the most segregated schools, that have the most segregated schools. Number one, New York, California, Illinois, Maryland, Michigan is Texas is actually number 5, Michigan, and then New Jersey. And I am speaking primarily of public school education, not charter school education. So if we looked at charter schools are exceptionally segregated, even more so than the public schools. Then how does that relate to fine arts and music education? So think about the context that we are working in large school districts that are really more segregated than integrated or diverse. So if that be the case, then when we start to look at the numbers of who's being provided an music education, in Texas schools, the data shows that 15 to 20% of the school-age children have access to quality fine arts. That means that 85 to 80% are actually left behind. And the presentation is going to show you more about why those students are left behind. In Dallas ISD, one of the main things that we had to consider was the context in which we work. That context of our schools are primarily made of Latino and African American students. We have smaller numbers of Asian American, Filipino, and white Americans. And so we looked at that as the background of in which we work. Then the second component that we had to look at very closely was the teaching force. Who was teaching our students? Where did we get our teachers from? How did they relate to the students? Were they alike, different? How did they make connections? How did they support um, student achievement and student involvement? One of the other big issues with um, the students that we have was also the teachers that we had filling the spots in the classroom. Um, it is a national conversation that there is a teacher shortage. You can debate whether or not that teacher shortage is real or if it is something that is just communicated over and over in data. But as we have worked with music administrators across the state, we have felt a severe teacher shortage for music education. And we don't know all of the reasons for that. There is a need for more research about why teachers aren't feel completing the education programs, or what we have noticed of the teaching force that comes in and interview with us is most of them are alternatively certified. And in the state of Texas, there are 240 teacher ed programs. Um, Many of them are for-profit organizations, AC programs. And so at one point we could have an idea of Well, I really don't want to hire an alternatively certified teacher. I'd rather have a teacher that has been traditionally certified through a school of education. But when we look at the universities in the state of Texas, the question becomes how many of the universities promote, sustain, and invest into a strong music ed program. As we have looked at the music ed programs or music programs, many of them instead focus on performance, or they may or may not encourage the students to become uh, a music educator. And so there is a need to really look at how we are shaping this. And then a larger part of it is if a teacher has been prepared in an AC program, what did that AC program provide for them to prepare them adequately for teaching in an urban or um, homogeneous type school that is made of largely of Latino and African American and students who have English as a second language? When I did research as a part of preparing our district to move forward, I did a survey on asking the teachers, tell me the kinds of classes that you feel most prepared you to be able to be successful in our schools. Most of them had nothing to report. And if they did have something to say, it was connected to a course not related to music education. It was some other course that they taken as an elective to fill out their degree plan that they found that related closely to helping them to be successful in the classroom. So when teachers come to our district, they may come in as AC teachers or they may come in from a university program, but they may not stay. They may not have the staying power, may not have the pedagogy, or many other things. And here are some of the things that I actually discovered in my research in the district is that teachers were greatly influenced by other teachers, by their community, by schools, by the discourse, by public opinion about what it meant to be a teacher, about their own experiences in their classes that they had come from or programs that they had come from. If they had come from a very strong program, then it was their expectation that they would quickly be able to go into um, programs that were also looked very much like their own, not thinking about what it would take to get to uh, that level of achievement. And so, what we actually had was this gap in learning from what is created in the discourse from other educators, from the public, from media, from the state, from parent organizations, from professional organizations of what education should look like or what their experience as a teacher should be like. There was a gap there. And so the teachers came in with attitudes and philosophies that built up or informed their actions that caused them to deny access for students. And we'll see more about that as we go through this presentation. This is what actually fueled my research. As I was working with teachers, I I could not believe some of the attitudes that I saw across the board. I would see a teacher on one side of town be extremely successful at a school that looked very much like another school across town, but the teacher's success was totally different. These are some of the components of what my research was actually about. And this is the model that I've used in Dallas ISD to help um, build teacher effectiveness and stronger programs. Number one, we have to start with the teacher's beliefs, their attitudes, and their expectations. That fuels all of their interactions and what they expect of students and how they're going to teach them, how much work they're going to spend in the process. And then through professional development, how much we've spent in building up the teacher's efficacy and their content knowledge. What we did notice in our process is that we had to have the funding for this, and we had to have teacher buy-in in the process. It doesn't just automatically happen. So let's talk a little bit about what the systemic barriers are that deny access to music instruction. Well, I will say that our practices convey what's really important. The United States discourse about teacher effectiveness, what makes a teacher effective, it's consistently looking at um, test scores. And so high stakes testing becomes more important than music education. Uh, we just saw in the news that 11 administrators were hauled off to jail for cheating on a test. But were they pushed in a corner? Is it that important? Did they feel that they had no other choice but to do that? Now, we can debate that. Yes, we will probably say no, they should have done the right thing. But what kinds of pressures are embedded in the things in the legislation that is going on and the accountability issues that we have? So our teachers are working in an accountability driven culture, but in the state of Texas, not only that, they're also working in a contest driven culture. So it's all about what a group makes in contests. Did they get ones? Did they get twos? Did they get sweepstakes? And the results are posted on a website. Um, those that are successful in this process get to be the ones that are elected to judge other groups. They're the ones that are elected to clinic others. So it creates that hierarchy of who's good and who is of value and who is important. And for us and for our students weren't always engaged in those kinds of activities. Um, because in our district, we were still looking at things such as, and this is throughout the state, looking at campus-based, um, site-based practices such as pulling students out of class for additional uh, testing, preparation for testing. Even though the legislature was trying to prevent pullouts, that I don't know how effective we are with that and how successful we are with this, because still students are being pulled out of class and being denied access to music instruction. In the state, we're supposed to have 45 minutes for elementary school. Every middle school student, grades 6 through 8, is supposed to take a fine arts class. And then in high school, there is a graduation requirement of 1 credit in order um, to graduate from school. So we have placed these things to help allow students access, but that really wasn't happening. happening. So actually what was going on in Dallas was a mirror image across the state. Students were being denied access to the classes. Uh, Students were being double blocked in reading, math, and English classes. Um, those campuses that were low performing had little or no music instruction at all. So one of the things that we did was that we invited major stakeholders to the table and asked them to evaluate our programs and tell us a little bit about the needs. We use that data, and along with partnerships with other entities such as Big Thought, we asked them to do some research on what did our students really want to do with our makeup of kids. What were they interested in? Number one, they wanted to play the guitar. Number two, they wanted to sing and write their own music. Number three, they wanted to dance. They wanted to play piano. Well, none of those classes were actually being offered or sanctioned by the state of Texas. So a few years ago, before our change in our music standards in the state of Texas, Dallas ISD had already adopted ways to change our curriculum. I think that this is the most important decision as administrators and in higher ed that we can make sure that we are meeting the needs of diverse students. We created an action plan. We looked at what were some measures of success. We engaged partners such as Little Kids Rock, Big Thought, the Symphony, and other entities, area universities. We understood at the very beginning, I said in the first slide, even though it is the goal of education to do all of these lofty things, you got to have money. And we don't see ourselves as Dallas ISD, the endless uh, well of wealth, but we are smart and we have engaged in long partnerships that have helped us to get the access for all of our students or more of our students. With that being said, because of our partnership with Little Kids Rock, we are able to allow approximately 10,000 students involved in guitar programs. It is the second largest guitar program in the nation. Um, these students get free guitars, drums, and amps and things like that for the instruction, as long as the teacher goes to the training. We solely support it. We had to have administrators that got on board with this, and we did have that. And so this is a clip that we're being covered by one of the area news stations that shows this partnership, and they provide all of the training free and the instruments. We had to provide the space. We had to provide a commitment from that campus principal to stay on board with the program, and that's a part of that. One of the other programs that we have that's large, I mean, just for our elementary programs, we have Music Memory. Music Memory is also kind of a partnership, and it serves grade levels 4 through 5. No, I take that back. Grade levels 3, 4, and 5. And each of the schools is able to bring a team. They do the performance at the Meyerson. This is a clip of some of our students from our Arts Magnet School that are performing on stage along with professional artists. In our curriculum, we have also determined that we need to offer more than band, choir, and orchestra. That's the paradigm shift that was needed for our district. We had to move beyond band, choir, orchestra, which is the three pillars that are consistently seen in Texas, and to meet the needs of those 85% that are left behind, we had to offer a different curriculum. So with guitar, with mariachi, with piano, with handbells, um, with jazz band, we were able to engage more students in our programs. We had to put aside the labels, the names. We had to give space and time. Um, you say a lot when you walk into a classroom and you have 50 kids that are crowded in a space that they can barely move from one side to the other. You say a lot if the space is not clean. You say a lot if you give little time for instruction. And so we actually sat down as a team and looked at what are we doing? How many students are we leaving out? Is it the right thing to do? If we choose not to offer music education to our students, what are we setting them up for? Are we giving them every tool that they will need to be ready for a college and for a career? Are we giving them opportunities to think outside of the box and to engage their um, entire selves in development? And so we wanted to make a change, and we tried to find partners that will help us to make that a reality for our students. It was not easy. There were people that laughed at us, there were people that made fun of us, including administrators, including other school districts, um, that we would make such a change. But we started to present some of our game change factors at professional organization conventions and things like that. And the more and more people would come to those workshops, the more we had believers. And we engaged in the dialogue, in the professional discourse about what was needed to happen so that more of our students would be engaged in music education. When you fail to see a student, when you fail to call them by name, when you fail to see the differences and their needs and fail to um, adjust to those needs, then you have not done a good service with what you are supposed to provide for them. And being in a role of power and being in a role of uh, major voice, we had to make a difference. So I want to open the floor, open the dialogue at this point so that others can participate. Um, I will share that I do think that we have to expand our concept of culture and diversity. I think it's quite limited. I think it's tying us to a place when the United States and many states have moved from culture and diversity and actually moved into something else. I don't have a name for it, and who knows if there is a name for it. Um, I There is a need for us to engage in dialogue, and not only in a music setting, but also in a general ed setting, so that we can um, talk about what it means to work in contexts where everyone is homogeneous and um, or in a context in which everyone is heterogeneous. What does that mean? Um, so I'll leave it there and just leave it with these things that we had to think differently about teacher education and what is required to be successful in a classroom. We had to think differently about partnerships with K-12 and to think differently about our partnership with higher ed. I think there's a need to think differently about scholarship and how we participate in the discourses about race, culture, diversity, and what we consider others. We have to think differently about our lives and our existence and experiences of privilege. We have to act courageously and make decisions for the good of those most often left behind. We have to be able to stand alone in our own resolve and be willing to be different, to go against the mainstream and against the grain in order to give access for more students. And I'll engage questions. Karen had a question about how well prepared do you find teachers to be for teaching the courses mariachi, handbells, guitar, and piano. They're not. Um, that is one of the gaps um, because there is still that gap between how higher ed um, teacher ed programs are preparing students and what the reality of the need is in the classroom. That's why I think that there has to be some type of connection between K-12 and higher ed so that teachers come out of music ed programs better prepared for the students that they're going to teach so that they'll have a better chance of engaging them and being more culturally responsive uh, in the curriculum and the development of the curriculum. I think Karen said, can they see it as an opportunity to learn aside? Very interesting that you say that. When I did the research earlier, just trying to find out the gaps in learning for the teachers in Dallas ISD, one of the main things that came out of that is they consistently said um, is that teachers need the opportunity to do field experiences and observations way before their student teaching. If they have the opportunity to do that, they can they can reframe what they have thought is a good teacher. Because in research it shows that young teachers have learned, they already come with a schema of what a good teacher is supposed to look like, sound like, be like, interact in their classroom, and so forth. And they gain that from their early educational experiences, K through 12. So if we can fill in that gap or reframe that or change that so that um, as an early teacher, they can then go into the classroom from a different perspective, using a different lens on what it means to be a teacher and how to engage students. That may help them to decrease that gap in learning. Karen, another question. How did you win over the band, choir, orchestra people? Oh my gosh, I don't know if I really did. uh, um, using, I think using language um, that did not tear down what band, choir, and orchestra, but not denying, but expanding opportunity. So when you talk about in our new Texas Learning Standards for Music Education, we have our music standards, but we have our general music standards that go alongside that. So you have band, choir, orchestra, but you also have general music studies. And in general music studies, you now have music technology. These are for students, opportunities for students to engage in music making and learning about music, um, but they may not be in choir and orchestra. They may want to be a work in the music studio, a music lab, or um, on the recording end, or in um, an opera, not an opera, but some kind of performance house or something like that. So being able to tie that to 21st century skills and college and career readiness, especially with college and career readiness. Because now, as we look at general music studies, all of those courses open the door for students to get jobs. And if we partner with other people so that we can have um, internships during their junior and senior year, if they already know how to set up an event for a recording, they already know how to do the editing, um, then that prepares them to easily go into a career field.
Mackie, can you all hear me?
Yes,
Okay, great. I thought I'd just chime in a little bit and go back to what you were talking about in terms of teachers being prepared to teach alternative classes, or not alternative classes, but just classes in other than band, choir, or orchestra. And it seems like that's
right,
one of the biggest things that we struggle with here at the university. First off, they've restricted here in Texas, and I know in other states, they're going back to this 120-hour model in the curriculum. And there has been a lot of debate in terms of what gets eaten up by that 120 hours. And
right,
there's not many universities around the country that offer how to teach world music or a multicultural music education. They might have a world music survey course, but then they have nothing
right,
that goes beyond the band, choir, and orchestra, and maybe 1 or 2 semesters of general music classroom practices that often include Orff Kodály and Dalcroze pedagogies. And
right,
it's been quite a struggle, and I see that students are hungry for that and thirsty for that, but they don't usually ever get that. And um, when I teach the Smithsonian Folkways certification course in world music pedagogy, you have a lot of teachers who now get it. When they're in the university system, they
right,
don't get it until they get out and they see it, especially in their student teaching experiences too. But then they're like, oh, I wish I would have had all of this other knowledge and experiences because now I really understand why I need it.
right.
And
Yeah,
it's hard to change the administration. It's hard to change the
yeah,
people who in charge of the curriculum to accept those classes, and even just get them in with the limited amount of hours that students are required to take. Um,
right,
and that's been one of the biggest frustrations that I've encountered is trying to change that system. Because if it doesn't change at the university level, it's never going to
yeah,
change once they get out there.
right.
They're only going to do what they know and what they've seen.
They're only going to do. You're right. Um, and you're so right. And I do know that one of the area universities actually had a roundtable discussion. They invited some of their graduate students who, well, not graduate students, some of the students that had graduated from their university, and they brought them in and asked them, how are things going? They wanted to find out if there was a disconnect and what the disconnect was, um, between what they were taught and actually what they actually needed in the classroom. It was eye opening for them, so much so that they have committed to changing the entire music ed curriculum at their university. Now, we would like to think that more of that could happen across Texas and in other states, but it's difficult to get people to separate from what they have always thought as being right,
Mhm,
um, or the best way.
mhm.
And that really goes back to hierarchy of what's important, what's valued, and what's not valued.
Hmm.
And in many instances, even when we were in our state, when we were talking about different classes or adding different classes, I mean, I was adamant about we will not call these alternative classes. We
Hmm.
will not call these alternative classes because that word alternative itself has such a weight to it
Hmm.
and puts those courses in another category, traditional and alternative. Now, I would I know that those words are not used in the learning standards, thank goodness, but it is it you still see it sometimes in writings in the Texas Magazine or Southwestern Musician or some of those. So I know that there's still a lot of work out there for us to do to change the story, to change um, educators' perspective about what what is valued music. It is not all music valuable for learning. So, what is our role? Are we are trying to make sure that every child has the same experiences, or are we just trying? Or we do we need to just teach music education for the sake of teaching music education? And that can come through many, many, many ways. So,
Hmm. Yeah, and here at Texas State, one of the, this is my first year, and one of the really interesting things of why I came here was that they offer a music education degree at the undergrad and grad level with
hmm,
a minor in Latin music studies, which I don't really know of many other places around the country that offer that. And,
right,
hopefully that becomes maybe a minor in world music, or maybe again, you don't want to call it alternative music. So
right,
you wish that this would be ingrained in every
right.
class, every music class that they take, and throughout the curriculum. But the reality is that's not going to happen. I mean, we
Yeah,
can't change 100 years of
yeah,
of
yeah,
music
yeah,
and curriculum in that regard. So how do we go about trying to educate our students so that they're going to be successful and ready in this
right,
different world that they're encountering? As you mentioned with the statistics of the school districts around the state of Texas,
right.
it's changing and it's
It's
different.
yes, and part of my research, as I was looking at the beliefs and expectations of effective teachers across the state, um, most of them struggled with that transition. As you could see on the chart, what we think is one thing is actually something else. Um, the transition happens very quickly. Within 3 to 5 years, it's totally different. The entire community is different, and so um, we still have a great deal to accomplish within the next 5 to 7 years. But my fear is that if we don't make a paradigm shift within the next 5 to 7 years, we may be, I don't know, it may not be a good thing for us. Um,
Hmm.
so,
Yeah, definitely. I think Karen had a question for you about if you've published, how you've
uh,
looked at the expectations of relief of teachers.
it's my dissertation. I am working on a book called The Teacher Factor, hoping to be finished by December. So, but that and it's part of that is going to be in that book.
Great.
So,
Any other questions or comments or thoughts? Okay, so I think we've come to the end of our time for this webinar. Please visit our webpage or Facebook page to learn about our next upcoming webinar in May. For now, thank you for your attendance and participation today, and special thanks to our presenter, Dr. Mackie Spradley. A video of this webinar will be posted on the Cultural Diversity and Social Justice ASPA on the SMTE website located at smte.us. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
thank you.